and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverent, Faith and Current Affairs.
Welcome everybody to Irreverence. It's me, Jamie Franklin, and I'm joined by my two regular co-hosts, Thomas Pelham, Rev Tom, as your screen says, and Daniel French. Chaps, how's it going? Tom, coming around to you to begin with. Everything okay? You missing me after your trip?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good to be back. Very good. Yeah, and all well. Nice and sunny here in Belgium today, so
yeah,
pleasant.
Did you enjoy the mass you attended, Tom?
The sacrifice of the mass, yes. Yeah, no, it's great actually.
I felt a bit nervous because I wasn't expecting to, but I don't think you've ever watched me do a mass before, have you? And then
no.
Did you give a little? Was this a weekday liturgy or Sunday?
Yeah, it was a weekday.
It was nice.
Did you give a little thought for the day?
I did a homily. We decided what I was going to say beforehand, didn't we? When we were having breakfast, we read the Bible and decided what the subject matter of the homily should be, and then I delivered it.
Yeah, it was
I've got one of my parishioners is also a priest. He was vice principal of Bristol Theological College, a very learned man.
Nice.
And when he sits in the congregation, it's slightly nerve-wracking, to say the least, because he closes his eyes and sometimes he nods and sometimes he doesn't. You're thinking, my goodness, what theological landmines have I put on? I made a boo-boo.
Jerry, I really enjoyed visiting you. Actually, it was great, and it was absolutely fantastic to see your family and to be welcomed into it. But I must say, the highlight for me was finding that little church nestled into the
St Andrews.
St Andrews. Yeah. Well, they claim to be Norman, but it's 1060, which is Saxon. I mean, seriously. I mean,
I had to listen to this this point repeated about 20 times.
Well, I mean, it just shocked me to think such ignorance. It's 1066 is the Norman invasion. You literally couldn't have a Norman church prior to 1066.
Was there no influence of Norman architecture on architecture, but from the Normans prior to the conquest? Though, are you making an assumption? Are you making a mistake? Are you making a mistake, Tom?
Yeah,
that's all I was saying at the time. I was saying, Tom, maybe these people have thought about this.
They clearly hadn't.
Okay, it's their church after all. But no, you're probably right.
Well, the painters and decorators who'd have come subsequently would have been Norman, wouldn't they?
They would. It was a beautiful little Saxon chapel with it's nestled into the Surrey Hills. We had a lovely walk, so that was quite special. Very nice.
Hang on a second, we're not in Surrey here.
I don't mean Surrey Hills, South Down, same
Hampshire.
Same hills.
Yeah, it's not Surrey though. Don't call my glorious county Surrey. We're not in Surrey. We're not in Surrey, mate. This is Hampshire.
It's the same chalk down.
This is Hampshire.
Anyway, does Hampshire really exist? I don't think it does. It's either Wiltshire or Surrey.
It's all just propaganda, isn't it?
So I thought you were making some sort of platonic comment there.
It's Wessex.
Does Hampshire really exist?
It's Wessex propaganda. Listen, I've got to issue a retractiones. Last week, I went on a bit of a rant very close to the beginning of the episode where I took issue with somebody giving us only a 4-star review because he said we interrupted each other all the time. I just want to say that I regret that. I want people to have freedom of conscience in terms of how many stars they give us. I mean, it does ruin our overall rating if you give us bad reviews. But if you think the podcast is not worthy of 5 stars, that's fine, And if you think we interrupt too much, fine. I
did spend that entire section trying to interrupt you as much as possible. I don't know if you noticed.
I noticed. I thought it was very, very funny what you were doing. Very, very funny and ironic. But I think I probably came across as quite ungracious, which maybe I am. Maybe I am.
Well, 4 stars for those who've enjoyed, for those who have access to Uncollared, we've talked about our bad reviews and how we might own them, and maybe even merchandise them.
I mean, if some more high-profile people criticize us, then we can put all the high-profile criticisms on a T-shirt and then sell it, or put it on.
My favourite was that cathedral canon who said we were a postmodern freak show.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, but unfortunately,
I quite like that.
It was just a prebend or something. No, what was he? He was the presenter, wasn't he?
Just a prebend.
Don't say where, please. Can you just not say where? I mean,
it was just. He was a.
Is it a cathedral near you?
Was it a large cathedral in a cathedral city built by
cathedral
near London?
Cathedral somewhere in the country. Anyway, look, I don't mind.
In a fictional place. Yeah.
I don't mind. Yeah. I don't mind.
He's going to edit this bit out, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, yeah.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Probably in your chapter now. Is it using your chapter?
No, Tom.
Do you every time you?
No. Look, honestly, I don't mind.
Your best buddy now.
I don't mind criticism. All right, criticism is fine. I don't mind. Seriously, it's all right as long as the criticism is not abuse, basically.
Exactly.
And if maybe the show is a postmodern freak show. I don't really think. I think we're more pre-modern, personally. Tom is a modernist. He's basically a kind of Enlightenment modernist.
Oh, happy Reformation Day, Jamie. Talking of that, it's his Reformation Day. It is a glorious day where we remember the return of the church to biblical and patristic truth.
Can you edit that bit out?
I thought we were against propaganda on this show.
What are we? Okay. Yeah. Well,
Tom, as I've said to you before, the Reformation, in my view, is a tragic necessity. I don't think it's something to be celebrated. But you can celebrate away, Tom, in your whitewashed chapel. That's absolutely fine. Anyway, we don't really want to sort of alienate.
Is anyone still listening?
Yeah, that's always the thing I'm sort of slightly concerned about.
The moment I said that was the moment Michael sort of signed off for this episode. So it's our last listener. It's all right. We're free from now on. We can say what we like.
Michael is a great man and a Roman Catholic. He's been on the show. Just for people who don't know, he's been on the show, and he's a Roman Catholic, very very faithful Roman Catholic, and all Roman Catholics are welcome to listen to the podcast. And when Tom makes his occasional kind of dismissive comments about the Roman Catholic Church, it's just banter, and Michael knows that. It's just banter.
I hope he knows that. Anyway, I have great respect for the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church.
Well, it's good. It's good of you to say, Tom. It's good of you to say. Should we move on? One thing I wanted to talk about before we get into a Bible today is I just wanted to talk a little bit about Matthew Perry's death. I don't know whether did either of you ever watch Friends? Have you ever watched it?
My parents are massive fans when I was growing up, so I have watched much of it.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I quite enjoy. I mean, it was good. It was good, sort of American. It wasn't quite in the league of Fraser, was it? But it was better than most of the stuff that you see today. Third Rock from the Sun and that sort of.
Third Rock from the Sun is not a contemporary sitcom, Tom.
Is it not?
Sorry, it's about 25 years old.
Well, okay. I don't mean third. What do I mean? What is contemporary?
I've got no idea. Third Rock from the Sun is really good. I thought with John Lithgow.
Do I mean? The one about Sheldon.
Oh yeah, that's the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Yeah.
You just, which is just horribly woke. Whereas I'd say, Friends was just good fun, wasn't it? It was good fun.
Well, I don't know. I think Friends was really bad for Western civilization because it normalized, the kind of promiscuous sex culture. But that's not to say
in China. It's banned in China, apparently.
Yeah. From the very first episode, it was all about like just sleeping around and everything like that. I mean, it is very funny, and I loved it when I was a teenager. But like, it's funny when you look back at something, you think, oh gosh, like what was actually being, what was sort of being taught to people through, the kind of normalizationist behavior through these, good-looking, witty,
but
20-somethings. Yeah,
I would say that there's a but there, isn't there? Like, I mean, we've managed to have various sort of. I don't throw out all my novels because some of them don't teach good ethics. I mean, obviously you can enjoy something and say, well, actually they were wrong at the same time. I mean, I don't know. Isn't there a kind of Isn't that? I mean, like Fraser, which is a great one. I mean, that also has the same sort of problem, doesn't it? There's a lot of it's all about kind of for chunks of it, Fraser trying to get a girlfriend, isn't it? Basically, but it's still very funny.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not against art on the basis that it's it doesn't teach Christian ethics. I just think oftentimes Friends, because it's a sitcom, it flies quite below the radar in that respect, and I just think that people don't necessarily realize what it was actually, the kind of values that it was necessarily conveying, and how revolutionary it was.
I've heard it being said that Friends, which was scripted by I forget their name, it's a boomer duo who put this package together, wanted to present the generation to come, my generation, Gen Z, what they felt the world looked like in the 1990s or should look like. And instead, my generation's reply to that was, so we'll show you what we think the world looks like. And when at the end of the 90s, we produced The Matrix.
Yeah.
And it said that, the boomers gave us Friends and Gen Z replied with The Matrix, that our view of the world is actually rawer and more complex and more cynical.
Mm.
Have you seen the film Dark City, which
yes,
The Matrix kind of pulled a lot out of, which is even
fantastic.
More cynical. It's beautifully dark, isn't it? It's
fantastic,
but even more cynical about what our world is. It's sort of got that same like neo-noir kind of feel to it. Have you seen it, Jamie? Dark City.
No, I can't join in this conversation because I've not seen it. So sorry.
In the show notes, you've said that Matthew Perry found God, and I didn't realize this.
Well, let me just read a little bit of this out. So this has been commented on a number of times. So this is from a couple of articles in Premier Christianity. Fame came early to Perry, who once prayed when he was young, God, you can do whatever you want to me, just make me famous, please. He later referred to it as a very dumb prayer, and towards what would sadly be the end of his life, he reflected, now all these years later, I'm certain that I got famous, so I would not waste my entire life trying to get famous. You have to get famous to know it's not the answer. And nobody is not famous will ever truly believe that. And of course, he's referring there to, the fact that he obviously had lots of emotional problems. He had terrible addiction issues, alcohol, drugs, etc. He spent millions of dollars trying to get sober. But in his, I think this is in his autobiography, which I've not read. I've just seen these comments on it. Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. This article here notes that after hitting rock bottom, Perry describes reaching out to God in desperation. God, please help me, I whispered. Show me that you are here. God, please help me. As I kneeled, the light slowly began to get bigger and bigger until it was so big that it encompassed the entire room. What was happening, and why was I starting to feel better? I started to cry. I really started to cry. That shoulder shaking, kind of uncontrollable weeping. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time in my life, I felt okay. I felt safe, taken care of. Decades of struggling with God and wrestling with life and sadness, all was being washed away like a river of pain and gone into oblivion. I'd been in the presence of God. I was certain of it. And this time I had prayed for the right thing, help. So in contrast to
that's interesting, isn't it? What an interesting thing. Now I was going back to you saying about The Matrix and a more cynical, kind of rawer vision of the world. There's something in his personal life that you can see that here is someone, who prays for fame and fortune, and then in the end. It's a bit like David in the Psalms, isn't it? He finds that the prayer that he should have asked for is that prayer to dwell in the presence of God, to be the wings, over the wings of a dove.
Yeah.
And there's clearly, this torturous journey over 30, 40 years in his acting career. Which, I don't know, did it come over in Friends? Friends is very saccharine, isn't it?
Yeah.
And very sweet. But
there is some,
of all
there
the
is
characters, there is in something of his character, there is a bit of a shadow, isn't it? He's probably the most real of all of them.
Yeah. Well, his parents broke up, didn't they, when he was a child? Like his dad left him. And I think there's this implication that he uses humor in order to kind of defend himself, as a kind of defense mechanism. And there's one episode where an older man called Mr. Heckles dies, and then he was in the apartment above them or something. And I think they go and find all his stuff. And Chandler starts to see parallels between his earlier life, Mr. Heckles' earlier life, and his own. And he starts to worry that he will end up like Mr. Heckles, as kind of like a lonely old man who was never able to make any kind of emotional commitment to anyone, and therefore was unable to form any lasting attachments. And he thinks that manifests itself in his rejecting women before they have the chance to reject him for pedantic reasons. And apparently he was a bit like that himself, like he went out with Julia Roberts and he broke up with her because he was terrified that she was going to break up with him. So I think there probably is something to that.
And often, do you not find it's the case that people in recovery, alcoholics, for instance, who take their journey seriously, are often some of the most humble and profound individuals. That there's a rawness to them and a humility that life has really pushed them down.
Well, that's a lovely piece of writing that I just read out. I think that's very moving, actually, and it's a really well written piece. I've not read his book, as I say, and that actually I really, it resonates with me. I mean, it reminds me of when I became a Christian myself. Not that I was a millionaire and world famous or anything like that, but it's really resonant. Sorry, Tom, you want to comment?
I was just sort of wanted to comment really about his sort of comedy, because it's interesting when you're a child or a teenager, you watch Friends, and sort of Joey is the sort of the point of humor, isn't it? Because it's quite and it is funny, but Chandler, the way that the character was played by Matthew Perry was just actually probably the most funny and profound of the lot, isn't it? And the one who grows the most over the series, in a sense. So I hope his encounter with God led to full redemption and repentance and a real experience, and we can hold that hope, I think, for him.
It was interesting that it sparked obviously a discussion about his Newsnight appearance in 1993 with it was 2013.
20 years after. I was out by 20 years.
I'm stuck in the 90s, chaps.
Peter Hitchens.
2013 with Peter Hitchens.
Yeah.
So Hitchens has had some fire sent his way in the last few days, where people have reposted YouTube clips of him and Matthew sparring, and Hitchens is sort of thrilled. I rather enjoyed it. I thought he was enjoying it too. Really. we were having a really good discussion, and of course I completely disbelieved anything he said, but in the days when Newsnight was really good. I don't know if it's sort of backpedaling a bit here, but mate, it was an interesting. It was an interesting.
Presumably interview. About addiction, was it? Because that's.
Well, yeah, and Hitchens' take is there's no such thing, mostly.
Yeah,
I think then Matthew Perry was completely dumbfounded by this and hadn't seen this one coming.
He called it. He said he drew an analogy between allergies and addictions, or he even may have said that addictions were a type of allergy, and Hitchens was just absolutely sort of mocking him and casting scorn on him for this.
I think Hitchens' point, as we've discussed before, is that there's a non sequitur, isn't there, when you say what is an addiction? Well, it's something that overrides your free will in some way. Okay, how do you get out of an addiction? Oh, by somehow regaining the free will and ceasing. But then if you were addicted, surely you had no free. And I think he has got a good point, although I think he's, as always, grumpy and.
Is he not saying it's a tautology? Isn't he saying that addiction is, you say what is an addiction, and then you say it's an overwhelming urge to do X, Y, or Z, and then you say, well, isn't that the definition? Isn't that just the same thing as saying the word addiction? In order to describe what something is, you need to give some kind of base, like an addiction. You need to give some kind of basis in some kind of biological reality or something like that. You can't just use different words to describe the same thing. I think. I don't know. Maybe those two things go together. Yeah.
Two things, because then you say, okay, so what does an addiction? So try and describe the effects of addiction. Well, okay, so someone's addicted to it, and they can't. They have an overwhelming urge to say drink. So therefore, but the only way out is to stop drinking. So therefore, how does this play out with free will? Either you have it or you don't.
Oh yeah,
So how do you stop? Well, by regaining in some way free will, by having self-discipline. Okay, then so were you ever addicted? If you could just regain self-will, So
I think where I struggle with that is, and this is where I thought Hitchens could have been a bit broader in terms of his analysis, is that if you look at the 12 steps, those first 3 steps are really about a realization that the only way I'm going to conquer this is by an admission of its power in my life, and that I need saving from God as I understand Him. And that that comes very close to certainly a Christian idea of our relationship with God, isn't it? That we're sinners, that we're compelled to sin, that nature is in rebellion, that we're in this state of being which overwhelms us, and that we need the grace of God to only the grace of God can save us. And I just felt there was a lost opportunity there in his exploration of that, because it does. Addiction can touch upon some very sort of crucial Christian tropes, that we can't just turn our lives around by free will alone. Otherwise, we become Pelagians.
Yes. No, I see that, Daniel. I see that.
Or semi-Pelagians at the very least. Yes.
Yeah.
Tom, you always have
Peter Hitchens, the semi-Pelagian.
I was called a Pelagian. I don't know. I don't know about this hard G is something which I'm cynical about. I'm skeptical of that. Chaps, I was gonna suggest we moved on to the Bible and did the Book of Acts, but this actually reminds me of the readings we've been having in the Revised Common Lectionary, which I know we all love, from the Book of Ecclesiastes. And I wonder whether I should.
They've been quite powerful, haven't they? Yeah.
Maybe we should read one of these out, maybe from Ecclesiastes 2, because it's sort of this conversation reminds me of this a little bit. So, should we do the Lord's Prayer and then we can read a bit from this? Is that acceptable to everyone? Okay. Well, I'll say the Lord's Prayer then, shall I? And then we can read this. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Yeah, so let's just read a bit from Ecclesiastes 2, shall we? So this is written by Solomon, son of David. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this was also vanity. I said, of laughter it is mad, and of pleasure what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works, I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks, and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delights of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity, and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. It just reminded me of that passage when we were talking. And I think, for people who don't know the Book of Ecclesiastes, my understanding of it really is it's a book about trying to find satisfaction and meaning in life without, largely speaking, without reference to God. And sort of Solomon tries all of these different things and finds that eventually that they come, sort of add up to nothing, add up to vanity. So, here we have, this sort of self-indulgence, wine, riches, laughter, women, etc., etc. And at the end of it, there's a sort of emptiness to it all. And it reminded me of that comment at least reminded me of this, when Perry says, I pray to God to make me famous. And I had to become famous in order to realize that fame wasn't the answer, that there wasn't, it didn't fulfill me. That we think that, don't we? If only I could be rich, or if only I could be successful, if only I could be famous, then I would be happy. But actually, that's not where happiness comes from. Happiness can only ultimately come from a relationship with God.
There's a therapeutic deism as well that can be very subtle. I know we've spoken about this before, which can be that Christianity, I heard this on a podcast today, I tell my kids that Christianity is fun. And it can be fun from time to time. But there's a sort of, we're not creating a psychological crutch here, or that's not what's on offer, or the prosperity gospel. And you can see how you can have a psychological version of the prosperity gospel, which is, become a Christian and all your problems will be ushered away, and everything's going to be fine, and you're going to be filled with bliss and joy. Well, to a certain extent, you hopefully will have a peace that passes all understanding, but this world is also a vale of tears.
Very true.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite, unless you take the whole thing as a, as a package, it's very easy to fall into that sort of, as what you call the psychological prosperity gospel, isn't it? Because you have got Christ saying, come unto me, all you that labour, for my burden is light. And you've got it's sort of the promises of knock on the door and it will be answered, open to you, and ask and it will be granted. But I think the part of the problem here is that we are way too shy about the apocalyptic, about the eschatological sort of nature of these promises of all being well, because it will all be well for all believers, because God will remake this world and all tears will go, and we'll see the Jerusalem descending with God at its heart. But until then, Christianity holds no promises, or at least
I'm not sure about that, Tom. I think that's too strong.
No, it has the promises of salvation and the promise of grace, but it doesn't have the promise of you're going to have a wonderful life and without struggle.
Yeah, but that's different to saying it holds no promises. I mean, what about Christ, saying, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. I mean,
but I mean,
it's a promise, isn't it? It's a promise for God's peace.
It is a promise for God's peace, but what does that actually mean in practice? Well, I mean, I think the peace comes not from not from anything other than being sure in the hope of the new creation. Surely,
no, so I don't agree with that. I think I think it's a promise that the presence of God will be with the disciples of Christ when He leaves. I mean, specifically in the person of the Holy Spirit. And that will make a tangible difference to people's lives. I've experienced that myself in my own life. I would say I experience it on a daily basis, and I have there's a significant being a disciple of Christ, knowing God, knowing the presence of the Holy Spirit in my life has made a difference to me, a huge difference. Since I was before I was a Christian, I had a completely different experience of life, and I think many people say the same.
But you can have that experience, as Matthew Perry is alluding to. It can be an experience which isn't just one of ecstasy and serendipity. It can be a sense of solidarity with the cross, that
of course,
feel the presence of Christ, not as essentially a nicey overwhelming nicey feeling or sense of direction in life, but that you feel the honor of suffering with Him. And that leads. That's sort of part of the peace that passes all understanding, which is in contrast. A lot of modern life, I think, because some of the sort of things that previous generations took for granted very much, in terms of clearly we're not all going to be homeowners nowadays, and I think it's becoming clear that inflation is knocking down salaries. So our material goods are much more about the things, the screens, and the things that can turn us on in our bubbles. That can keep our minds happy. I think what Christianity offers is we're not just another buzz in your life. And the peace that passes all understanding is, I think, quite a tough thing as well.
Yeah, I guess, Jamie, my challenge to what you said would be, I mean, yes, we have a peace, but I mean, in what sense is that? How would you say that's not just a psychological prosperity gospel. So there
I didn't say it wasn't. You said that phrase.
Well, Daniel said it first, but
okay.
but I think we should be aware that actually people do come to Christ and still are deeply troubled. Like, he doesn't solve all their problems just because they're Christians. The addict who comes to Christ is still broken potentially, and still.
I'm going to have to get going, chap.
Okay, right. Bye, Daniel.
Goodbye, Daniel.
He's leaving just in the middle of a very interesting conversation. So, Tom, I thought we could move into talking about some stories now. You're going to have to go. Eventually, I'm going to be left by myself in this episode, but just so everyone knows, it'll gradually get less and less interesting as my co-hosts leave. But basically, I mean, clearly, the ongoing thing with Israel and Gaza is huge, and we're going to talk about it. But something that really sort of caught my attention this week is that we had a number of people making this point that there were obviously these enormous sort of pro-Palestine / pro-Hamas protests going on in London, with people saying all kinds of things, including what looks like the advocacy of genocide in Israel, and at the very least, like, violence. But while that was all going on Twitter, ADF UK have released, that's the I forget what they're called. I forget what the words stand for. ADF. They're a faith-based legal advocacy organisation which protects fundamental freedoms and promotes the inherent dignity of all people in the UK and across the world. Is it Alliance Defending Freedom, or have I just made that up? Anyway, they just posted a video of, I think it's Isabel Vaughan-Spruce being arrested for silently praying outside an abortion clinic on the 18th of October in Birmingham, even though she's already been charged with the same offence, and the charges have been dropped. And it's a really, did you watch the video, Tom? It's a really bizarre video of a lady policeman who seems to have some kind of piece of paper that she's just printed out, and it's got a kind of flow chart, and it's telling her which question to ask. Did you see this?
Yeah, I could see it. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I can see on the I can see her reading this sort of flowchart with various different questions, isn't it?
It's absolutely weird. Do you want to hear some of it? Let me read.
No, you're not. Are you part of a pro-life organisation or pro-choice organisation?
I am, but I'm not here in that capacity.
Okay. Are you protesting?
No.
Are you here to pray for the lives of unborn children?
It's a little bit leading, but no, I'm not.
Okay. Can your actions be carried out elsewhere?
I can pray elsewhere, but I want to pray here today.
Right. Why have you chosen the location here to stand?
This is an abortion centre that I'm standing outside of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you aware that there is a public space protection order in place here?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Are you aware that you're breaching the public protection order?
I'm not, no.
Will you move from here to outside the exclusion zone?
I don't believe I need to.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, it continues like that. And then basically at the end of it, she basically says that she's going to be given a fixed penalty notice for protesting. And Isabella says on a number of occasions after that, I'm not protesting. they just give her one anyway. It's it's just crazy, isn't it, when you've got these things going on?
It's I mean, his presumably at the same time, vast numbers of jihadists calling for the inner struggle of Islamic thought in the middle of Birmingham are protesting, virulently. But here, is a lady reading a flowchart to someone praying quietly, and it's amazing because she's already been kind of acquitted, hasn't she? That's kind of the background.
Yeah.
So there's no, once again, silent prayer does not seem to go against the actual law, which is about protesting. I mean, how do they know? so the buffer zone bans any expression of approval or disapproval of abortion, including through prayer. But if she's doing it silently, then there's no expression of approval or disapproval, is there? I mean, maybe the expression on her face was disapproving. Can you be done for that? I mean, it's
chilling, isn't it, Tom? Chilling stuff.
I mean, again, and presumably she'll refuse to pay it or go to court. It'll be thrown out because, onward we go. But it's just, do you know, there's been some stuff on Twitter about this, hasn't there? Wasn't it something like over 10 million abortions since the Abortion Act? Quite considerably over that now. This continues and will only get more. It's sort of speeding up. This is the destruction of our civilization. Really, it's the darkness. It's the darkness, and people make a real fuss about gun crime in America when many more souls are killed through abortion being cut up in the womb. Very sad.
Yeah, well, it is very sad.
Two wrongs don't make a right, for sure, but. So you can accuse me of whataboutism, but at the same time, this is murder on a vast scale.
Yeah. Well, listen, Tom, I know you need to go soon, but I thought I'd just give you an opportunity, or give us an opportunity, just to talk about the kind of feedback we've been getting, particularly from last week's episode. There's been a lot of talk, and I guess, so this is specifically about the Israel-Gaza thing. So I guess there have been two sort of, broadly speaking, two major lines of criticism. So the first one is just, frankly, a kind of pro-Palestinian thing. We're not talking about the ostensible atrocities that are being committed by Israel. We're not talking about the victims of the Israeli incursion into Gaza. We're only focusing on what's been happening, what happened to Israelis on October the 7th. And the other criticism is the kind of more I don't really know what the right sort of label is to call it, but the view that the world has been controlled by a small cabal of people, and that this includes sort of every geopolitical event. And so basically every geopolitical event is not really as it seems, but it has some kind of alternative agenda in order to distract and confuse us. And because we're not saying that we are, that we're cucks and we're being taken in, and we haven't learned anything from what happened at COVID, when COVID happened, and so on and so forth. So what do you think about that?
Well, goodness, I think we were I tried to be quite balanced, in how we looked at it. I'm no flag waver for Israel's behaviour in the West Bank, which nor do I think that they've always been honourable and sort of truthful. I think that's fair. I think also that they haven't ever deliberately, without military reason, slaughtered innocent civilians or babies in retaliation or in breach of a ceasefire. I don't think that, and I really, we spoke about evil and last week, and I'll stand by that. I think Israel has been misguided at times. I think they've been duplicitous. I think they've probably not always told the truth. They've certainly used Mossad and various other sort of paramilitary organizations liberally. And they've not always, and there's still sort of ongoing violations in the West Bank of settler communities. This is true. But I just think that Hamas's actions are on a different order of evil, and that. I don't think it's right to call Israel out as genocidal. I don't think there's any evidence that they've been trying to genocide Arabs or Muslims across in their lands or anywhere else. If it is a genocide, I think their population of non-Jewish Israel has increased fivefold in the last 20 years or something like that, threefold maybe. I can't remember the exact number, which is a sort of very...
Well, yeah, the amount of Muslims in Israel has multiplied several times in recent decades.
It's and I think they're there's high court judges who are Muslims and things like that. So and they're represented in the political system as well. So I mean, really, I think we're talking about two. Say that and say, well, therefore we can't trust them about anything. I mean, if you're serious, and I've seen this on our Telegram actually, if you're seriously saying that Israel set up the October the 7th massacre against its own people, then you're trying to claim that some sort of enormous conspiracy exists of sort of psychopathic ministers, psychopathic soldiers, psychopathic civil servants who will celebrate and deliberately kill their own people and even babies in order to start a war. Then I just think Occam's razor says that that's not the case, and it's far more likely to be the sworn Islamists living next door. I think there are two sides to everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean the two sides are equal. In the same way, and also, I mean, there's a very good article in the Daily Skeptic about. I'll send it to you, Jamie. I don't know if you read it.
No, I don't think so.
Dr. David McGrogan. Is Israel's war on Hamas lawful? And he goes into the sort of international law sort of side of things. And I think he makes a very good case that actually they are executing quite a proportionate. Because proportionate isn't saying 1,700 Israelis die, so 1,700 Palestinians must die. It is. I mean, that's not proportionate. That's just in no way is that justice. Proportionate means in the case of any action taken by Israel has due regard to potential civilian casualties being taken and minimized in order to achieve a military aim. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that all of that is always the case. We can't know, but I think people are misunderstanding what the conventions actually say, and also I think there's a sense in which people are effectively denying the right of Israel to exist as a state if they say they can't protect in some way their civilians. Calling for a ceasefire is one thing. There was a ceasefire, wasn't there? I mean, before October the 7th, there was a ceasefire. Israel was out of the Gaza. They weren't shooting at Palestinians. They weren't bombing Palestinians.
Yeah.
And then the Hamas perpetrated this awful thing. So I don't think we are being taking sides necessarily. I think that we called, and I still call on Israel to use restraint and to think carefully about what its objectives are and whether they could be achieved in other ways. But at the same time, there are still 200 odd hostages, aren't there?
Yeah. I mean, I broadly speaking on the same page here, Tom, I think. But I think one of the things that sort of concerns me about this whole thing is that people accuse us of being taken in by propaganda and everything like that. But I would say that I think people who are saying things like that are equally, the criticism is equally apt to be applied the other way around, because the stuff that we're hearing about, what's going on in Gaza it's being mediated through Hamas, who are the ruling power in Gaza. So they're a terrorist organization, and they have perpetrated the most horrendous crimes in living memory upon civilians, as you say, including children and babies. And you're trusting their information when you say things like, certain amount of civilians have been killed and everything like that. So I think there's a real sort of double standard that needs to be acknowledged in that sense. And the question really is who is being deceived and who is being taken in. I mean, we've got this. Probably everyone to a degree. I don't think we claimed to have a complete and utter bird's eye view over all the information of the war. Do we? And we didn't. But we that's not what we're doing. We're taking. What we've always done is taken the news sources we can and trying to approach them from a Christian position, using the Bible and the moral and ethic code of the Christian faith as
as our hermeneutic. That's what we do, you know.
And we're not going to get time to discuss it because you're going to have to leave, Tom. But I've got an article here that was a good article about the just war theory being applied. I mean, maybe I'll read some of it later once you've gone. Being applied to the situation in Israel, which is completely apt. There is an empirical question about what's going on, but you can't deny what happened on October the 7th. There's literally video footage of it happening. No serious person denies that this has actually happened and it was carried out by Hamas. So I don't really understand what people like that are saying.
I saw on Twitter. I mean, it's again and again like this poor girl who the
German girl.
Who they found, and they've said she's been beheaded.
Yeah.
And they know this because they found significant, chunks of her head, scattered around. And I saw on Twitter, how do they know she's been beheaded? They haven't got a body. Well, I mean, it's all, this hermeneutic of the people are applying to this of just absolute suspicion. I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's healthy.
Well, I think it's actually, I'm not saying people are intending to do this, but what the danger is that what they're actually doing is they're becoming apologists for a regime that would perpetrate these things. And you can see this. Just let me give you this example, Tom, of this guy Dili Hussein, who is he's some kind of radio host. Let's just see. He's deputy editor of Five Pillars UK, host of Blood X Bros Pod.
Isn't he on?
Which is some podcast, and he's on his thing. He's got From the River to the Sea, Palestine Will Be Free, and he writes for the Huffington Post as well. And he lives in, I think, does he live in Bedford? Somewhere in the UK, anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's posted this tweet, which comes from his own podcast, which says a flight from Israel to Dagestan was forced to divert from its destination in the capital of Machach Kala earlier today after pro-Palestine protesters stormed the airport to confront the Israeli arrivals. And it's literally a video of like a large crowd of Muslims going around an airport looking for Jews. I mean, like literally going through, like opening doors, like kicking down doors, going through corridors, shouting Allah Akbar and everything like that, looking for Jews in this airport. And this guy's retweeted it and said, this is the kind of welcome all Israelis should be receiving at the airports of Muslim majority countries. So he's basically calling for violence against Jews. And by the way, when he uses the word Israelis there, the only reason he does that is because he doesn't want his hatred of Jews to be too explicit, because he probably knows that would get him kicked off the platform. But essentially that's what he's saying. He's saying this is the kind of welcome all Jews should be receiving at the airports of Muslim majority countries. Now, I think you can say, oh, well, anti-Semitism, it's a psyop and it's being used, it's identity politics and blah, blah, blah. But, I think that there's a real danger here of minimizing the past, of minimizing historic hatred of Jews, let's say, hatred of Jews and violence against Jews. Let's not use the word anti-Semitism if you don't want to use that word, if you say that that's a made-up word. But hatred of Jews, violence against Jews, the Holocaust, which was a real thing and it was diabolical. And I think that the attempts to minimize it are disgraceful, quite frankly. And sorry, Tom, can I just finish this point? And what these people are doing is they're creating an environment in which hatred and violence against Jews can simply be justified. And I think it's really, really dangerous to be doing that.
Yeah. There are other, of course, touch points as well. I mean, there's this video from the London Palestinian protests where Jews are shouting, Kaiba, Kaiba, Yahud, Yes, al-Muhammad Sayyid, which is Kaiba, Kaiba, oh, Jews, the army of Muhammad is coming.
Sorry, Tom, you probably meant Palestinians were, not Palestinians, but Muslims were shouting that.
So what did I say?
You said Jews.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean Jews. I meant Muslims. Yeah. Sorry, and this is happening. This is happening. This is blatant anti-Semitism. It's blatant hatred of Jews. Has no place in this country. Whether or not Israel are right or wrong. I saw an article in the Telegraph about people refusing to play football with the Jewish football team. This is ghastly. This is. I thought we were. Obviously, having seen COVID, pulls some tissue from over the eyes, so to speak. not tissue.
I think wool.
Wool. That's it. Wool. Tissue paper. Wool. Same stuff. Wool for the eyes, because we saw how easily a country falls in behind a sort of Stasi-like narrative, and here we have another one coming in. This hatred of the Jews. It's disgusting.
It's. I mean, that thing about the football thing, that did seem to be. I read that as well, and it seemed to be a little bit thin, the evidential basis for that story. But one can believe it's happening. But anyway, I mean, the point you're making, broadly speaking, is correct. I just think dismissing this like it isn't a real thing is, it's not a good move, is it?
Right, Jay, I'm going to have to leave you to read articles out to our listeners on your own, I'm afraid. Sorry,
okay,
but
that's right.
Thank you all for listening, and sorry that this irreverend has been so disruptive. And then there was one.
Yeah,
every blessing.
Yep. All right, blessing. Thanks, Tom. All right, see you. Have a good day. Bye. Okay, everyone. Well, I'm going to do two things now. I'm going to stop picking my beard because I was criticised as well on YouTube for that, and I was just going to talk about just war for a minute because I think just war is interesting. Just to say to people who who criticise and who make or disagree with us, we want to be really sort of open-minded and engage with comments and criticisms. It's not very nice when people call us names, and when like on YouTube people have been accusing us of being somebody accused us of taking bribes from who I don't know, from the Israeli government, and people call us disgrace. Abby Roberts calls us cowardly bastards, etc., etc., etc. It's not nice. I don't like that. I don't like being called names. I don't like people casting aspersions on our characters. So I'd appreciate it if people didn't do that. But if you do that, fine, that's up to you. But if you want to engage, rationally with what we're talking about, by all means do so, and send us an email, reverendpod@gmail.com. For me, I think the situation is horrendous, and it's intractable without a revival of Christianity, or at least not even a revival, without the widespread conversion of both Jews and Muslims to Christianity. I've been reading the book Son of Hamas by Mossab Youssef recently. He's the son of one of the founders of Hamas, and I really recommend this book because he became a Christian. And he lives in America now, and he, that's his take, is that he found Christ, and he recognized that the only way to truly have peace between Arab and Jew, or Muslim and Jew, is if they come to know Christ and start to put the ethical teachings of Christ into practice of forgiveness and reconciliation and so on and so forth. So I really think that that's the only solution for the area. The situation is very, very deep. It's historical, it's religious, and there are no easy answers. What we've been doing on the podcast is we've been responding to what's been happening in the last few weeks with the atrocity on October 7th and the subsequent attack or retaliation of Israel on Hamas in Gaza. And I think that the question of just war is really important in this regard. So I'm going to read a little bit from an article that was in the Times. It's written by Philip Collins, called "Is This a Just War? Let's Apply Some Tests." Because I think one of the major strands, apart from this is a war orchestrated by globalists and you're just cucks, or that you're shilling for Israel or whatever it might be, the serious criticism of this situation in terms of the criticism of Israel is that Israel are, they're conducting an unjust war, that they're bombing civilians or whatever it is they might be doing. And again, the only real way you can make any kind of evaluation about whether or not something is just in a society like ours is to look at the Christian tradition, because the secular tradition doesn't have, as Alistair McIntyre, made the point in his book After Virtue, it doesn't really have any sort of fixed standards. It's got all this borrowed capital, this borrowed intellectual capital from Christianity. And so the just war tradition comes to us, it goes as far back as St. Augustine in the beginning of the 5th century. And it's mediated through Thomas Aquinas and then through Grotius, and that's the only real way you can have a rational conversation about this, because otherwise you're just going by your feelings. So really, the only criteria we have comes to us from Christianity, which again is demonstrates to us why Christian civilization is so valuable and why it's such a disaster for us to move away from a Christian ethic towards a kind of post-Christian secular ethic. The other thing you can see in this situation is when you see Hamas doing what they did on October the 7th, I mean, as horrendous as it is, that is more typical of the way warfare has been conducted throughout history than the kind of warfare that we're used to that is influenced by Christianity. Warfare outside of Christian civilization, warfare has always been about killing civilians, about raping women, about killing children, about plundering people's land, about doing basically whatever the conquering tribe want to an invaded people. The only reason there is any kind of concept of restraint within war is because of Christian civilization. And so that's one of the reasons we find it so shocking when we see something like October the 7th. But in that kind of culture, I'm afraid that, I mean, it may be extreme, but I'm afraid that that kind of thing is more normal. Anyway, that said, Philip Collins, let's read here. Just trying to think where to start on this one. Okay, here we go. The philosophical tradition of the just war has two earthly authorities, the 13th century Summa Theologica of Thomas Aquinas and a 1625 work by the Dutch jurist Hugo Grotius called On the Law of War and Peace. The idea of the just war has three parts. It must be fought to put right to clear wrong. It must be conducted in accord with justice, and the aftermath must respect the motivating reason for war. Aquinas provided a list of just causes that could have been written today: avenging wrongs, punishing a miscreant nation, restoring what has been unjustly seized. Grotius broadly concurs, but the two authorities diverge in a way that matters. Aquinas states that a war can be just if it is the expression of a rightful intention to promote good and forestall evil. Grotius, though, places his emphasis more squarely on whether there is any prudential likelihood that the objective can be achieved and that a better tomorrow will therefore follow. Or as Tony Blair put the point in Chicago in April 1999, military action can be justified when, quote, we have clear objectives and when we are going to succeed. There are two prudential worries about this conflict, that's the Israel-Gaza or Hamas conflict, that derive from this insight. Israel has the perfect right to retaliate, and it has defined a clear military objective to eradicate Hamas, whose presence in Gaza obviously makes peaceful living, let alone a return to Camp David. That's referring to an early part of the article, which is about the summit between Arafat, and Bill Clinton at Camp David. That makes it quite impossible. Yet this is where we friends of Israel need to invoke Grotius. The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, sundry Israeli generals, and the Saudis are all urging a degree of restraint on the Israeli incursion into Gaza, not on the grounds it's wrong in intent, but that it cannot hope to succeed. Prudence on this point is not just a problem after the fact, it is part of the moral case for the intervention itself. If an action has no feasible hope of success, the moral case for war is damaged. I personally think that that's true. I guess the question is how high a degree of likelihood does there need to be of success in order for a war to be justifiable? I don't think that's at all clear. It's easy to see how the Israelis get into Gaza, but there is a fog shrouding how they get out. What plausible regime can Israel leave behind? To depart after a ground invasion with no functioning state would be disastrous. The Palestinian Authority is in no fit state. The United Nations is hobbled by Russia and China. It's possible to imagine just about a convocation of Arab states that will draw up a viable interim government for Gaza, coupled with a modern Marshall Plan, though this distant prospect is hardly part of the current conflict. It's not obvious either that the eradication of Hamas passes the prudential test. If I could conjure Hamas out of existence in an instant, I would do so. These people are terrorists, so intoxicated with victimhood and unhistorical self-pity that they are prepared to sacrifice their own population for it. Yet that does not mean that they can be readily taken out. On his visit to Israel, President Biden asked the Israelis not to repeat the mistakes that America made in the wake of 9/11. Sadly, it appears that friendly counsel is being ignored. One lesson of the past 2 decades is surely that terrorism cannot be defeated by military means. The Americans had some success in identifying and assassinating senior Taliban personnel. The Taliban are at this moment in power in Afghanistan. The enduring effect is marginal, as the Israelis know. Kill one general and another appears. Blow one tunnel up and they will dig another. It's the attempt to drive tanks through an idea. I want it to work, but I don't believe it can. I understand what you're saying, and I think the military inventorism of the US and Britain was badly misplaced in the last few decades. But I think the main reason that it was so badly misplaced is because it was the attempt to export the kind of Enlightenment liberal tradition to countries in the Middle East. Now, to a certain extent, the analogy works because it's about trying to eradicate a kind of terrorist regime rather than to take over or to invade, say, a modern nation state and take it over or something like that. So there's an analogy there, but there's not an analogy between the objectives. The US, it may have suffered the attack on September the 11th, but it wasn't invading a state which directly bordered it, which posed the kind of threat that clearly Hamas posed to Israel. So I think that there is a disanalogy there in that respect. But nevertheless, I do agree that there is something very difficult about trying to take over or trying to destroy rather a kind of amorphous organization like Hamas, because it's been said, for example, that Hamas is more of an idea than an actual organization. And so it's a very hard thing to destroy. I haven't read enough to know what the sort of plan is if Israel is successful, but I assume it's to put a more moderate Palestinian government in place, such as the Palestinian Authority or something like that. Again, I don't know enough to sort of comment on that. There's a clear wrong issue here. If the unprovoked slaughter of October 7th is not a clear wrong, then our moral language has been emptied of all meaning. The conduct of war can be just. It is not a war crime to send bombs into a populated area as long as the attacker can plausibly cite self-defense. Israel can and must choose to maintain the supply of water and electricity to Gaza and continue to issue warnings about forthcoming bombardment. All of this can pass the test of justice. The troubling clause is the practical one, which is another way of saying that until the politics change, the war changes nothing. Some people in the comments have questioned that thing about sending water and electricity to Gaza, because that would constitute the Israelis actually giving energy and power to their enemies, and that then they're under no obligation to do this. And I think that that's correct. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't be concerned about the civilians who are in the Gaza Strip at all. It's not to say that, but it is to say that you're not under an obligation to supply your enemy with energy and with water. That's like saying, well, like during the Second World War, we were under an obligation to give resources to Nazi Germany. It's not true. I suppose they could do that if they were so minded to do it in humanitarian terms, but yeah, I don't really see why Israel is held to that kind of standard when you wouldn't normally be held to such a standard in the prosecution of a war. So anyway, that's a bit about the just war tradition. It's a Christian idea, and as I say, the only really real way that you can make any kind of coherent moral case for both the decision to go to war, so that would be jus ad bello, I think, go to war, or is it a jus ad bellum? It might be a jus ad bellum. And conduct within war, jus in bello, justice within war, is through the Christian just war tradition. So you need that Christian framework in order to make sense of it. And some of it is an empirical question, as we were discussing earlier. Do we really know what's going on in Gaza, or is it being mediated to us through Hamas, who are unbelievably and diabolically evil people who are they're obviously not a trustworthy source? What I do agree with here is that saying until the politics change, the war changes nothing. I agree with that. But the only way the politics is going to change is if people's hearts change. And the only way people's hearts can change is through Christ, is through being converted to the message of Jesus and to repentance and faith in him. And I think that's really the only way ultimately that the situation can change. What are God's purposes in the Middle East? It's not for me to say, but maybe this is a kind of precursor to some kind of widespread revival of Jews and Arabs in the area. I think that's got to be our greatest hope in the situation. So anyway, I've said enough about that, and all my co-hosts are gone, and so I should probably move on. I'm just going to do a little email of the week. But just to say, before I do that really appreciate everyone's support, particularly when something like this comes along and, we might start saying things that, listeners aren't on board with, or they find they've got a different opinion or whatever. My hope is that we can still be friends, and that you still feel like you can support the podcast even if we do have different views on what's going on. I do rely on support from the podcast. I have a job with the church, and I have a house, but I need to make my own money myself, so I rely partly on the money from the podcast. I'm also a writer. I've got Substack, and I'm writing a book which I'm being paid for, but I do rely on this money, and we need the money also to run the podcast. So if you do decide to support the podcast, you really are helping us. You're helping me directly. You're helping us run this podcast, and you're meaning that this podcast can carry on and hopefully develop beyond its present form. So it really does make a difference. So if you want to support us, please do go to irreverentpod.com, and you can become a patron. You can click on the red box and become a patron. That means you pay a monthly subscription to us, or to the podcast, and we give you the episodes early, and you get our uncollared bonus audio podcast, which is us just talking about stuff that we feel a little bit freer to talk about just in front of our Patreon audience rather than a general audience. So there's perhaps some slightly more candor there sometimes it's just fun, sometimes it's banter, but it's just a way of saying thank you to people who decide to support us. So please do go to irreverentpod.com and click on the red button and become a patron. You can do that for as little as £1.50 plus VAT in the UK per month. So the bar is very, very low to make a financial contribution to the podcast. So if you like this podcast, please do that, because it makes a huge difference, and you'll enjoy the uncollared audio bonus episodes as well. I think they're quite funny, sometimes quite interesting at other points. So please do go to irreverentpod.com and become a patron, or you can buy us a coffee. Again, there's a yellow button on the website where you click that and you go through and you get to buy me a coffee. So that's irreverentpod.com. Click on the red button for Patreon. Buy me a coffee is buying us a metaphorical coffee, where essentially you just make a one-off donation to podcast, and you can leave an encouraging message, and we often read those out. So please do support us in what we're doing here. We really appreciate that. It makes such a difference. Okay, I'm going to read an email out now. So this is from Chris. Dear Revs, could I suggest what is driving a high level of emotion over the Middle East situation is that both sides of the high volume public discourse are premised on collectivist and authoritarian ideologies. Anyone who's not a collectivist authoritarian immediately attracts the ire of either or both sides, because their reasoning exposes the falsehood of that form of thinking. In a sense, it is revealing about the residual collectivism and authoritarianism in so many self-identifying dissidents as well, who are now magnetized to one side or the other. I think more accurately that the apparent antisemitism is a function of looking through a collectivist lens by and at both protagonists and victims. You can also rewrite that, and then he quotes, the apparent, I suppose he's sort of quoting himself and rewriting himself, the apparent Islamophobia is a function of looking through a collectivist lens by and at both by protagonists and victims. It illustrates the same patterns. In my view, it is these meta-ideologies, collectivism and authoritarianism, that are the sin or the contract. The phobias or appearance of their pattern of action are the symptom. I think Daniel made an excellent case for personal salvation in your last episode. This is much of the Christian message and is not collectivist and not authoritarian. It is counter to both. Those who have allowed the false idol of ideologies to capture them become demons when they're consequently crushed conscience attempts to agree, i.e. when it is pricked by truer words. Therefore, expect the flack and keep speaking the gospel as best as you are able, all the best. And then he says, P.S. Bad news, civil engineering is increasingly captured. That refers to a comment we made about how people might need to become engineers in the future if they want to be Orthodox Christians. But apparently civil engineering is increasingly captured. Look at the institution of civil engineers and the institution of structural engineers, for example. Recent presidents of both were external lecturers when I was a student. And one of the pair was explicitly advocating then for exploiting engineering project decision-making moments to deliver ideological ends. Well, that's not good news, is it? Yeah, I think I understand what's being said here, but it doesn't mean that there can't be such a thing as hatred of Jews or hatred of Muslims. I think that surely that's what looking at a group of people through a collectivist lens and hating them is. That's just what it is, isn't it? It's about seeing a group of people and hating them as a collective rather than seeing them as individuals. Maybe I've misunderstood what's being said. But, like I've said this a number of times, I don't like identity politics. I think that the way that identity politics has been bandied around in recent times, calling everyone left, right, and centre racist, accusing people of various phobias, Islamophobia, transphobia or whatever it might be, homophobia or whatever it might be. I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to be going around accusing people of this, because I think it comes across as paranoid and just daft, to be honest with you. I mean, it's obvious that most of these sort of accusations of racism are completely baseless nowadays, because there's such a sort of low bar for what's actually considered to be racist. And so it's just silly. It's just a way of trying to tar your ideological opponents and destroy them and cancel them. So I absolutely see that. But I've seen so much on social media in recent weeks, things that are happening in our country, which I don't really understand how you can deny that they are instances of hatred of Jews, anti-Semitism, if you like, unless you just deny that there's any possibility of anti-Semitism or any possibility of hatred of Jews. When you've got people who are calling for the killing of Jews, quite openly. So, like, for example, we've got this. We didn't actually read this, but we've got this article from, where was it from? The Telegraph, where it goes through. I mean, this is not, people are, it's the mainstream media. Oh, you can't quote the mainstream media, but he himself is quoting, various things on that have come from social media. So, where is it? Yeah. So, in the past few weeks, video footage from Liverpool, Bradford, Birmingham, Blackburn, Nottingham, where I used to live, Greenwich, London, Leeds, and Cheadle show. This is video footage. Imams saying prayers for the Mujahideen and victory for the heroes of Hamas. They're called Jews, the guardians of Satan. They've asked Allah to, quote, wipe out the unbelievers, destroy Jews' houses and homes, purify and protect Al-Aqsa from the usurper Jews, and get rid of the unjust Jews, count them in numbers and kill them entirely. Don't spare one of them. Now, if that is not anti-Semitism or hatred or murderous hatred of Jews, then there just is no such thing as the murderous hatred of Jews. But if you're going to say that there is no such thing as the murderous hatred of Jews, then I think you're denying, you are basically denying the right of Jews to exist, because you're essentially saying there's no crime that could be perpetrated against them that could count as a sort of murderous, violent hatred of them. And I just can't understand that. It would be the same of any race. If people were saying that about white people, if they were invoking Allah to count them in numbers, white people, and kill them entirely, don't spare one of them. That's the quote, right, from a mosque. If they were saying that of white people, if they were saying that of black people, if they were saying that of Asian people, you would say that's just sheer, unadulterated, murderous, hate-filled racism. And it's completely unacceptable in any society, but particularly in our society, because we live in our society and we don't want people saying things like that in our society and invoking that kind of behavior. Now, I just think that people who are ignoring this or minimizing this, I think are in very, very dangerous territory, because the evidence is absolutely clear. This is video evidence. This is happening in mosques. It's happening on our streets. It's happening on social media. You can see it. It's not made up. It's not AI. This is real. And if you're denying that this is real, then you're denying something very, very dark and evil that's happening. And I just think you need to be aware of that. And I'd like, write to me and tell me why I'm wrong. irreverentpod@gmail.com. Yeah, seriously, write to me. Send me an email. Tell me what is wrong about what I've just said, because I just can't see it any other way at the moment. I see something very dark, very evil, very ancient, actually, this ancient hatred of Jews, which is re-emerging in our society. And one of the things I find so extraordinary about this is that this has all emerged since 1,400 Jews were murdered by Hamas. And now I've not watched the footage, but the footage is there. I've read reports of it. The Hamas terrorists, they crossed over into Israel and they literally killed men, women and children, defenseless people, murdered their families, tied them together threw them in fires. There are reports of babies being roasted in ovens while men were gang raping their mothers. There are reports of babies being stabbed to death with 12-inch knives. There are reports of soldiers blowing up men in front of their children with grenades, tying a father and son together and throwing them in a fire. This is and these people, they recorded it and they put it on social media. Now, if you're going to deny this, I think you're in a really dark place, personally. And anyway, that wasn't the point I was making. The point I was making is that this sort of wave of hatred of Jews has started as a result of that happening. And it's not even a result of what Israel have done. And that's a point that Nick Timothy makes in his article, is that the anti-Israel protests actually just started immediately after October the 7th, even before Israel had retaliated. So that's my take. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's the way it seems to me. Anyway, it's been a fairly intense episode, I think, and I should probably leave it there. Listen, really appreciate people listening to this podcast. Feels like really febrile times at the moment. As always, of course, what we're advocating for is not this or that military action or this or that government, but faith in Christ. That's ultimately what matters, to have our heart transformed by God, to forgive our enemies, to love our enemies, and seek reconciliation and peace. That's not a contradiction, I don't think, to just war theory, by the way, because just war theory is predicated on the idea that sometimes the most loving thing to do and the greatest way to seek peace is by going to war. But nevertheless, the hope is the Christian gospel fundamentally. Anyway, I'll leave it there and I'll await the feedback, which I'm sure is going to be interesting. So love you all. And let me say a prayer, say the collect from the Book of Common Prayer, shall I? And get it out here for the 21st Sunday. Let us pray. Grant, we beseech thee, merciful Lord, to thy faithful people pardon and peace, that they may be cleansed from all their sins and serve thee with a quiet mind through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. There we are. Okay, look forward to seeing you again next time on the YouTube video. Please do share it. Even if you don't like it, you can still share it. We had really good views last week, so please continue sharing it around and leave the comments below if you're on YouTube. If you'd like to, please review us on iTunes and give us a good review if you can. And send me an email if you'd like, irreverendpod@gmail.com, with feedback and comments, questions, criticisms, as long as they're civil. That'd be really nice. But until next time, keep watch and keep the faith.